as people are entering the room, we'll give people some time to arrive. The chat is open, everybody. If anyone would like to introduce themselves, tell us where you're tuning in from. We love to hear that. And then we'll give it a couple minutes, and then I'll go ahead and give an introduction. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Finnposium, which is a regularly occurring program of Finlandia Foundation National. My name is Claire Zura. I am the director of the Finnish American Folk School, which is a program of Finlandia Foundation. I'm tuning in, as I said, from Hancock, Michigan, here in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where we're finally enjoying a little bit of sunshine after a winter that won't quit. Today, however, we're here to talk about knitting. We're very excited to have Gail DeMeyere, who lives in Charlevoix, Michigan. And she comes from a background of a career in the arts. And she has worked at art centers and museums in Utah, Kalamazoo, Petoskey, and Charlevoix. Some of you may, particularly knitters, may be familiar with her work. She co-authored this book, The Sweater, A History, in 2017. And since stepping down from curatorial work, she's really been focused on textile design, and recently studying family roots through her study of Finnish sweater design. Some of you who are Finnish American Reporter subscribers may have read her article in the January 2025 issue, introducing the subject that she'll be speaking about today, the road to Korsnäs. And Gail has traveled to Finland twice, in 2023 and 2024, to explore firsthand the origins of the Korsnäs sweaters. And she's been learning from the people there who are diligently working to keep the tradition and the practices alive. So the Finnish American Folk School is really excited to have Gail here today. And also we're excited to be hosting her this fall to teach a workshop here in Hancock. So if that's something of interest to you, information about the workshop and other workshops that we host throughout the year will be available always on our website, social media. Maybe consider signing up for our email newsletter if you want to keep track of the happenings here. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gail. She'll give us a presentation, and I will be keeping track of questions in the chat. You can use the chat to communicate with each other. You can also drop specific questions. If you want to make sure that I see a question, drop it in the Q&A box. And I will kind of collect those questions and summarize them at the end of the presentation and make sure Gail has an opportunity to answer. And with that, welcome again, everybody, and take it away, Gail.
Thank you. It does help to hear where everybody's coming in from today, because it's a little challenging to talk to a computer screen for 45 minutes without participation from the group. So thank you, everybody that signed up to listen to my story about the road to Korsnäs. And I wanted to thank Claire Zurlaw and Tommy Flanagan as well, especially for all the help with the tech. Since I'm a homeschool hand knitter, I'm not much of a tech person. So what you see here on the screen is a table at the Korsnäs Museum, of which this picture I took in October of 2023 with a tattered sweater on the side. And my talk today is going to guide you through the steps it took and the research it took before I was able to walk through this wonderful building and share stories with Korsnäs knitters in Korsnäs, Finland. So it started when I was exploring my family roots. As a child, I lived downstate in Michigan. Downstate means below the bridge, and in the Detroit area. And in the summers, we would go up to the UP, Upper Peninsula, and visit my family. On the left here is a picture of my great-grandmother, Sophie Morsi, and she was born in Oulu, Finland. And my great-grandfather, Henry Haapala, was born in Hailuoto. And they both immigrated to the United States in the early 1900s and met in Calumet, Michigan. They did not know each other before they made their way to the US. And in Calumet, fell in love, they married, and they moved to Bruce Crossing, where they had a farm And there they raised 9 children. The picture on the left is my great-grandfather Henry with a plow horse at the farm. And of the 9 children, here, I'll get my pointer here, is my grandma Elsie. She married Uno Pokkola and her brother Wayne, their brother Eno, Albert, Lempe, Ted, Helga, and there's missing George and Mary, who are also two of the 9 children. 3 of these gentlemen, let's see, Albert, Ted, and George, they never married. They stayed in the family farmhouse and they became well-known musicians in the UP. And there was a documentary artist from Finland that came, Erik Matanen, and he did a documentary which is shown on Finnish public broadcasting. I have the link down here in the bottom, and we can refer to it later if you would like. So they became a little bit of a family celebrities from that. It's a really beautiful video. So fast forward, after, growing up and having this large Finnish family in the UP, I was in Raleigh, North Carolina in the early 2000s, and I was working on my master's thesis. I put this picture up in case someone wants to Google it. You can find a PDF file of the thesis there. But during the process of my thesis work, I was harking back to my Nordic origins because I was studying sweaters all over the world, but then it made me wonder what were the roots of the area where my family originated from. And on this side here, and I'll get to this a little later, how I handled my research, I would graph out patterns and then I knit samples for all the sweaters I was studying. But in this process of research, I came across the work of Marketta Luutinen, who was a mentor and has become a friend of mine and just a wonderful person. She keeps the spirit of textiles and Korsnäs knitting and other forms of craftsmanship alive in Finland. It was difficult in the beginning to study Finnish sweaters because I wasn't finding a lot of information readily at hand. And then the information I found was in Finnish, of which I do not speak. So it was a challenge in translating or finding material to study. So I was feeling a little frustrated in the fact that I wanted to learn more, and I wasn't finding what I needed. And I was so grateful to find Marketta. So fast forward about 16 years, I was working in Northern Michigan at an art center as a curator and art director, and I received a little postcard in the mail. And it was from a woman named Jane Merrill. It's a little pink postcard, and she said, "I hope you are Gail Lambert. I've been looking for you. I'm writing a book on the history of sweaters, and I read your thesis, and I realized we have to work together on this process. Please contact me." So I did call her, and over the course of the next 3 years, Jane, myself, and Karen Ben Horn worked on this book, The Sweater of History, of which you can find around. It covers globally everything we could come across to tell the story of all the different routes that led into modern design and different influences and different materials and stories that define sweaters. So our book was published in 2017, and it was gifted to this lady, Christine Larson, on the right here. And Christine lives in Seattle, and she was very interested in learning all she could about knitting. So she contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in traveling to Finland with her and studying all the roots of knitting, history, and design, of which I was sort of feeling like I had won a game show or something, because it was always my dream to go and study these sweaters up close. I had only seen them in books and on videos and had never really experienced touching them, flipping them over, looking at the seams and everything that knitters do. So then we started planning a trip and COVID hit, so that put everything aside. And then we revisited it in 2023, and in October, jumped on a plane and ended up in Helsinki. So this picture is we landed during the Helsinki Baltic Herring Festival, which is a festival that takes place in Helsinki for a long, long time. I want to say in my research, it said something like the 1700s, pretty much uninterrupted. So we landed in this thing. I had arrived in Finland, just beside myself, because it'd been 20 years that I've been studying the craftsmanship there, and I was never able to see it up close and personal. So here we are in Helsinki. And I wanted to give you an idea of, I've got a little laser here. We landed in Helsinki here, and we traveled up to Jyväskylä, which has a Finnish craft museum, which is marvelous. I'll show pictures in a second. Over to Vasa, where there's an Ostrobothnian museum, and we were able to look at a lot of textiles there. And this star on the map is Korsnäs. So Korsnäs is the most westernly piece of mainland Finland off the Gulf of Bothnia. And that's where the road has led me. And you can see the screen. So this is a picture of a panel that's in the Korsnäs Museum. And I wanted to start by describing what is a Korsnäs sweater. And this is a translation of the white area below. Around the middle of the 1800s, when crochet became popular, handcraft among women in Korsnäs, the knitted sweaters gave way to the colorful patterning sweater in combination of crochet and knitting. And it talks about how crochet came into the area in the early 1800s, and then it was adapted and it was used in different areas, and patterns were translated from knitwear to crochet. Okay, so now back to my thesis. How I approached the work there was, with every sweater that I studied, I would do a literature research, and then I would graph out patterns or design work in each sweater, and I would knit a sample, and then I would, like I showed earlier, graph it out, and then I would make a schematic of how I would actually work this sweater. So in this schematic, the arrows are pointing to the areas of the sweater that were crocheted. So this bottom region, there would be a crochet panel, the upper sleeves, the cuffs, and the shoulder area. And the tapestry crochet is more durable, it's less elastic, it's denser. And these areas of crochet were very utilitarian because they helped where something would be worn down. It would help the sweaters durability so it could last and last. And then also in the research, I would, in a nutshell, define the region where the sweater is from, the origin, yarn, different design motifs, and then any little notes I had. So here, the Korsnäs sweater uses both knit and crochet. The crochet areas are form-fitting and not as elastic as the knit areas. The neck opening is shaped the same for the back and the front, of which I'll speak of more. That way that you could wear the sweater forward, and then when you find areas of wear, you could flip the sweater around and wear it in reverse. So it doubled the length of the elbows and different areas that would get more worn in use. So that's how I handle my research, and I've dotted lines here to show you the areas of crochet. And then you would transfer, you would have the areas of crochet, you transferred over to knitting, and then the knitting, for me anyway, was a much quicker process. And then you go back to the crochet areas. And so we are in Finland, and I was finally able to meet Marketta Lutinen, which was just wonderful. She was so helpful to me. But on the right-hand side here is her thesis, which I was able to obtain in my work in the early 2000s. Part of this thesis is written in English and the majority of it is written in Finnish. So I was able to read the little synopsises. But this is Marketa and myself in her home studio, and you can see areas of knitting samples on the ground there. And Marketa has her PhD, and she's a researcher in crafts and culture. And to speak of her thesis, I have a little excerpt in her abstract. The main goal of her thesis is to examine rustic Finnish knitwear as a product and conveyor of meaning, both as a phenomenological concept and as a sign. The second aim devised a method to produce essence analysis, which lends itself to product research. So in Marketa's research here, she studied the Korsnäs and the elusive sweater, both very well-known Finnish sweaters. She also served as the director of the Taito shops in Finland. These are crafts organizations. I believe now there's 17 of them, and they're scattered all over Finland, and they have knitting, weaving, all sorts of fiber art designs, and each Taito shop has specialized products for the region that it serves. And in actually the sweater I'm wearing, if I could stand up a little bit, I have a Korsnäs sweater. This was a kit that I purchased through Taito Shop because before my trip came in to Helsinki, I wanted to be able to knit a Korsnäs sweater to wear. And that was a challenge because I didn't have anyone to teach me. So it was a matter of studying in books, and I found a few YouTube videos. But the Taito Shop is able to provide people of interest materials to learn and to study different design work. So I was able to meet Marketa, and these are some samples of tapestry crochet work that she had in her home. And when the tapestry crochet came to Finland in the early 1800s, it was adapted to knitting patterns. It was easy to translate the knitting patterns to the crochet patterns, but understanding that the crochet patterns would provide a denser piece of fabric, because with each stitch in tapestry crochet, you don't have, if you're doing 2-color or 3-color work, you don't have long floats behind the stitches. Each stitch is woven in with the loose threads behind it. So you can imagine sometimes knitting in your knitting patterns, you'd have floats behind the work. With tapestry crochet, each stitch connects with the unused fiber behind it. So it's a slow moving process, but it's easily translatable in terms of design. So we're off. I've met my mentor, Marketa. We're walking through Helsinki, and she opened the doors to many different museums and collections, which I felt very honored to be able to share with her. She's a very generous person. So one of the museums we went to was the Bragdroch Museum, and this was a costume museum that early in the 1900s, it was more of a collection where they were collecting different Finnish costumes, national costumes for plays or dances or different events where they wanted to show culture and history. And then it developed into more of a cataloged resourced museum. There was a researcher named Ingvar Heikel, I'm sure I'm not saying his name right, but he would travel around and collect pieces of textiles that he found available. He purchased Korsnäs sweaters and different weavings and added to this collection. I think right now they have 2,000 different items, and they recreate items. It's a wonderful museum. But they did say the curator there said that the 2 Korsnäs sweaters they have in their collection are 2 of the most popular pieces they have, and they have been lent out to different exhibitions. I'm going to take a quick sip. Okay, this is called the Gradistina sweater. It's part of the collection in the Braggs Museum. And this was my first, after 20 years of research, ability to sit there and look and touch and feel the Korsnäs sweater in it firsthand. So it was a very emotional thing for me. But I was able to examine the seams, examine how things were put together. It's nice to have books to do your research with, but it was nothing better than to be able to touch a work and be able to manipulate it. And here you can see where the crochet starts and the knitting begins. And as I said earlier, the necklines in the Korsnäs sweaters are in the same shape as the drop and the shape of it as the back. So you are able to reverse your sweater in wearing it. And there are variations on different ways to treat the necklines. But also with the tapestry crochet, one of the nice design features is that you can, once you finish this section of crochet at the top, you're able to cut into and shape your neckline. As opposed to knitting, if you did that, it would just all unravel and you'd be at a loss. But with the tapestry crochet, it binds itself together with all those interwoven stitches. So you can cut in your neckline and then you secure it, stitch around the opening, and then you can add an adornment of collar. And with the tapestry crochet, you'll also notice that sometimes the necklines have to be a little bit wider because it's not as elastic as knitting. So to get it over your head, you have to widen that area. And here you see how the sleeves are crochet at the top and how they're sewn into the sweater. And I just have samples of close-ups of each sweater. And for me, I took many, many, many pictures because then you can readily go back in your comfort of your home and do further examination. And also, it's very easy if you want to replicate patterns. I'm working on a second sweater right now, and the first sweater was a design out of the Tato shop, which was taken off of a pattern, a child's sweater in a museum in Ostrobothnia. But now I'm just taking favorite patterns and combining them together to create my own sweater. And the cuffs, you see a little bit of a wear on the cuffs. And one thing that comes into play with the two separations of textile types, the crochet hitting the knitting, it gives you the ability to separate the two if you needed to mend something and bring them back together, or lengthen a sleeve. You know, you take the cuff off, lengthen the sleeve, bring the cuff back on. It's a very practical design for many ways. And here I am with my mouth hanging open because I was sort of stunned. My friend Christine Larson, who traveled with me, she helped us take pictures of looking at different collections. But that's a Gorsnäs sweater. You'll note that when you're looking at textiles in a museum, you always wear gloves with any artwork you handle because you don't want the oils of your hands to transfer to the materials, or you don't want them to be damaged in any way by your work. And there's Marquetta taking pictures. And this museum has showcases around with all the different traditional costumes. And off one side, there is a room where they do recreation work. It's like a beautiful little sewing studio. And Maria Linden Mallinen was very kind and generous and laid everything out for us to study that day. So as a textile person, we were measuring up the sleeves and getting the stitch counts and measuring the sweaters. This sweater was around 10 and a half stitches to the inch. And I'm trying to think in my head about questions you may have while you're looking at these. Please feel free to ask me at the end. So we measured the sweaters, we analyzed the sweaters. This sweater here was purchased by Heiko, I think in the 1920s. And it was Mars Matas' sweater. And it was purchased for the museum. So it's one of the 2 sweaters that were purchased. And you'll see variations in length of cuffs, how much percentages of crochet is at the bottom versus the knitwear in the area. Now the cuffs on this, you'll notice, are much plainer than the sweater before it. And you can note that there's wear here at the angles. I believe he was using this as a hunting sweater. So originally, the Korsnäs sweaters in the mid-1800s were worn primarily by men. They were worn for special occasions, holidays, weddings. And then as they became more and more popular and more readily available, they were worn both by men and women, and you would have master crocheters that would go from area to area and help with the more difficult nature of doing the pieces at the tops and the shoulders, at the bottoms and the shoulders, and they could be handed off to knitters to take on the knitting portion of the garment. And another picture of measurements. And I'm looking at this as we're all looking at this. You see something new every time. But these sweaters are packaged up and they're not on full display at all times. You would need to make an appointment and to ask to review the work. And they're very gracious and generous to help us do that. So after we visited the Bragg Museum, and a few more samples. Oh, here, I wanted to show you. This is the inside of the sweater. So you see the tapestry crochet on the inside, and you do not see any floats behind it. It's just straight crochet. And it's beautiful to see how the inside is just as meticulously crafted as the outside. It's clean, it's neat, it's orderly. And then there's Maria Lindenmallen and Christina Larson and myself. And this museum is in downtown Helsinki, within walking distance of the main esplanade in Helsinki. And when crochet came to Finland, it was also used, it wasn't just sweaters that it was being used with, it was translated into, these are tobacco pouches or coin purses that became worked into crochet, and these are also at the Braggs Museum. And pattern influences, the western coast of Finland is a highly Swedish-speaking population, so you'll see some Swedish motifs and motifs from Norway all over that translated into the Korsnäs work. So from after Helsinki, we headed north to Jyväskylä, to the Craft Museum of Finland. And I have to say, it's the most beautiful, beautiful museum. It has so thoughtfully done the layout and design of textile art. Now, this is the main floor of the museum. They have special exhibitions that rotate. And then down on the bottom here is the shop. On the upper floors, up in here, you have another exhibition. And then on the side here, you have rooms that have just craft making materials. So anybody can come in if they want to do printmaking or textile work. The materials there and the space is there. And for a donation, you can go in and you can work on different designs, whatever is your liking. And then in the lower level, it is a permanent collection that houses textile history in Finland. And it was just so beautifully rendered. As a museum person, I really appreciated the thoughtfulness that was done in the display. And this little critter here on the side, he they had little animals and of many different sorts that children could follow through the museum and find them, and to find different types of techniques being made available. It was just a cute way to incorporate children's play. I enjoyed it myself. See a little bunny there wrapped around a chair, and a little floating angel. And this is a sample of the Korsnäs sweaters that they have in the craft museum. They would be in drawers that could roll out, and different displays. So here you have some Sami looking boots, a Korsnäs sweater. They also had a beautiful Lutulainen sweater, which is the sweater from Hailuto. It's a gray sweater with pattern work, just done in knit and purl stitches. It's another very well-known Finnish sweater. And a close-up. So then we moved to the west, where we got to Österbothnia and the museum in Vasa. They had an extensive collection, and it was very nice to have the collection laid out on tables so that we could take all the time that we wanted to go piece by piece and learn from these different examples in history. And you'll see in these pictures that a lot of the sweaters here are very well loved, very well worn. But I found it was really nice to be able to see how sweaters were mended and repurposed to extend the life of the sweater. This is a Lilius Esther sweater. From the 1920s. So the earliest sweaters that we have are in the 1860s, I would say. And this comes from 1920s. You'll see a lot of the different motifs that are repeated in many of the sweaters. There's the vines. Looks like a carnation. And here you can see a little bit of mending on the side. I'm pulling up a note just so I don't miss something. And then the shaping. You will see this even today in sweaters where you have different shaping of areas. This was done in a straight area, so you're not shaping the crochet area as much, and then you're increasing up to the underarm. And the dancing girls. I've zoomed in on this little, let me see if I can zoom in. I can, okay. This area will show you, see how the green stitches here jump right to the red stitches? When I get into the Korsnäs Museum and the knitting ladies, you'll see that the bottoms of the Korsnäs sweaters were often knit by one or crocheted by one person. And then when you got to the knit areas, you would have 3 people in a circle working on one sweater at the same time. And you can tell on looking in the side seams of sweaters that there are the jog from the green, using my finger, not my pointer here, the green to the red would show that there are 3 different sets of needles working at one time, so that the jogs between patterns, you can count the rows to indicate whether it was knit by one knitter or 3. And here's some examples of patchwork. So when you had the sweater in its initial glory, it was used for special occasions. And then as the sweater wore, it was used for more inner wear, farm work, fishing work, and the necessary patches were made. I find a lot of beauty in just seeing the mended areas and how they were incorporated. It's very modern, right? Modern mending. And this is a very well-used sweater. And some are conditions of wear, and some are conditions of, storage after time. And you'll see sweaters that are reshaped for different generations of owners. I think this is just stunningly beautiful. So we have the sweaters that were laid out in the museum for us. And it was very nice to have the space to be able to examine and explore the different work. So now, after my 20-year research, I was on the road to Korsnäs, checking my time, and we went south from Vasa. I can't remember how long, less than an hour to reach Korsnäs, and we have come to the Korsnäs Museum. And we are greeted by Sophia Helsing, who is here on the left. And Sophia was very helpful to me in my preparation for the trip. I wrote her very long emails, and she was translating them from English to Finnish and translating back for me to be able to read her responses. She was so giving and helpful. But she greeted me at the outside of the museum with Sophia, and this is Christina Manfolk, who's the director, and Sophia works as a curator or a collections manager at the museum. So when you walk into the Korsnäs Museum, you have this display room of all these hand knit mittens from different regions in Finland, and there were books. And then on the left side, there was the cottage and the homestead area where you saw the kitchen and different rooms of a regular Finnish home in the early 1900s. So I wasn't quite sure if I was going to be able to meet a bunch of people or it would be Christina and Sophia. And then they opened this door and there was a room full of women from Korsnäs in all of their Korsnäs sweaters sitting around a beautiful fireplace. And it was a very emotional moment for me because I felt like I had finally made it to, this huge realization of a dream I had 20 years earlier. And this shows you in some of these samples how the tapestry crochet was used on the sweater shoulders and on the ribbings, but they also created belts out of tapestry crochet. Hats were made out of tapestry crochet. And on the left here, you see the tobacco pouches as well. So wonderful display. And here's a book that I relied on heavily in some of my research by Greta Dahlberg. And she collected stories. She, as a child, would visit her family on sleigh and see her aunts and mother and grandmother working on Korsnäs sweaters. And then she had seen she saw a museum display in the Ostrobothnian Museum, and it made her want to research into her family history and learn more about Korsnäs sweater design. She wrote this wonderful book, and it's filled with stories of different relationships with the sweater and family and gifts that were being given. I have one story that I got out of this book of a woman named Anna Westberg. She was much loved teacher in Korsnäs, and her students got together and made her a Korsnäs sweater, and they presented it to her on her name day. So they snuck into her house at midnight on her name day and gave her a sweater that her students had made, and woke her up with this quote that said, "Forgive us for daring to weigh you out of sleep, wake you up. The reason for this is to greet you on your name day. Today is your name day and your name is Anna." And they presented their teacher with this beautiful sweater. So there were sweaters that were gifted to people that were teachers. The picture here on the cover of the book is Aura Berg. She was a midwife that was gifted a Korsnäs sweater, and she would wear it as she skied from house to house when she was called for her help. And she wore her Korsnäs sweater proudly. But if you do, I know you can get this book through the museum in Korsnäs, and I translate everything through Google Translator. So it's a very, very charming book. Greta also made a study of the different dyes and the different plants that were used to create the colorways for Korsnäs sweaters. And here is a little chart that shows you the different types of dyes. Every now and then when you're looking at Korsnäs examples in museums, if you have the opportunity to do so, it's primarily wool, but you will see with some different color variations, cotton that creeps into some of the designs. And when cotton was introduced into Finland, it was thought as a more desired fiber, probably because it was different, and it could create a more intense colors in the dye process. So this is another portion of Gretel Dahlberg's work. And so then this is the side of the museum that has the housekeeping area. And here's a video of what it's like in the museum. For me, just to be able to watch, this is Gun-Britt Stenberg, to sit over her shoulder and be able to watch her put the stitches on the bottom of the sweater. She would be considered the master crocheter that does the bottom portions of the sweater. And these people were very treasured craftsmen that would travel from farm to farm and help do certain portions of the sweater, and then they would be passed over to the knitters who would knit in a group to finish. And I was fascinated by watching every little stitch that she did and how she wrapped the stitches behind. A wonderful lady. So I took copious notes and watched her carefully. It was challenging for me to do the crochet work because I wanted to do it as authentically as possible. And I'm left-handed, and I forced myself to do the crochet work on my sweaters right-handed, which sort of added to the challenge. And here you see her. And you just hope that more people are taking up this tradition, because Greta or Gun-Britt. Let her finish this. I don't want to think that this is a dying tradition. There's a lot of people that are learning crochet or learning about Korsnäs sweaters right now. It was very popular from the late 1800s to early 1900s up to maybe 1930, but then it dropped off. You could buy ready-made sweaters, store-bought sweaters. You had the influence of wartime, war years, that you couldn't get a hold of the wool, and the production stopped. But there are people now that are taking up the history. Thankfully, people like Marketta Luutinen and these ladies in Korsnäs. And here you show how you would have Gun-Britt, the master crocheter, do the base of the sweater. And then this is where the three knitters get together, knee to knee, and each one with their own set of needles working around in circles. And it was just wonderful to be able to see this firsthand. And here's another video.
Du skulle kunna berätta att de stickar ju sådär att de kastar ut.
Jo, det kan jag, men
För det är ju som gammal stelhet nu, så
Ja.
det stickar vi ut med mig någon gång.
yeah, so I should
Now, this little video encapsulates, I think, things perfectly. You have the one knit or crochet Gunbred on the side, and then the 3 in a circle, the fireplace going. It's just wonderful. And I see I'm running long on time. So here we have the gathering. And I was glad to be able to finish my sweater before I got there. I felt like I was part of the gals. There we are. I do have names and I don't want to pass those up. This is Gunnar Westerbach here. This is Mona Wester. This is Inga Britt Manfolk. This is Brita Niefors, Gunbrit Stenberg, Astrid Smeeds, Christina Manfolk, Sophia Helsing, and myself. And quickly, I'm just showing a couple of books that were very instrumental in my work, if anybody wanted to look them up. Some are easier to acquire than others. These are 2 books by Marketa Luutinen. The decorative crocheting book is available pretty readily. This book on the right is not so easily to find. It's out of print, but a masterful book on Korsnäs. And then here's the article that was done by the Finnish American Reporter this January. Thank you, David Mackey, for asking me to write an article for the magazine. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I'll turn it back over to Claire.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you so much. I love being able to see the close-ups. You know, I'm a knitter as well, so it's really exciting to get to see this up close. And I can imagine, as some of the people in the chat also said, we kind of understand how it was an emotional experience for you to get to touch them and see them in person. So we do have a number of questions, and some of them you answered along the way, but I just wanted to sort of draw your attention to what people seem to be most interested in. And at the top of the list were questions about the materials. So people were wondering about whether it was wool, and as you explained, mostly wool, some cotton. There was a question about if you know what kind of sheep, was it hand spun? Was it sourced locally, or do you know anything about those?
Well, there's a swath of time here. So like the early sweaters in the 1860s forward, yes, that would be farm wool, which was an ample supply, hand spun, but it was not, it was readily available and it was hand dyed out of plant materials. And, you know, I don't know the type of sheep it was in the farms, but then you get into the 1900s and you'll see some synthetic dyes in some of the sweaters, some different fibers creeping in, and the stitch count gets bigger because the time consuming knitting at 11, 12 stitches to an inch versus 8, you know. So you see a transition like any textile work, where it went from the base root of natural fibers, natural dyes, and then moving forward into what was available.
And the dyeing was also a question that came up several times. I think people appreciated seeing the panel with the examples of where the colors were coming from. One of the questions we got from a few people was, why red and white predominantly? And a secondary question to that is about matter. I think you had noticed that krappi, which is the matter that was used for the reds in that example you showed, is not actually native to Finland. So they were wondering, generally speaking, why this color combo, and specifically the red was of interest to a lot of folks.
Well, on the western coast of Finland, it was a very heavily influenced Swedish population. And reds and whites and greens were predominant in Swedish colorways of the time. So I think that had a great influence on it. You're also on a coastal community where there's trade coming into Ostrobothnia or Turku and moving northward. So you had the influences of crochet came in from other sources in the early 1800s, and pattern work came, you know, people were influenced by patterns that they saw in imported goods. And I would say people that went back and forth, some people worked in Sweden during one period of the year, in Finland in another period of the year. So you have all this conglomeration of events happening. But there are, if you take certain design elements, like there's a design called the Selbu rose, which is an 8-pointed star. You can trace that back into early Egyptian periods. So there's just elements of design that get translated, but in Finland, they got translated into their own design aesthetic and their own practical sense of knitting with intention, meaning great effort was taken for the hard working material of the garment. And so I'd say that the colorways, I would say, was Swedish influenced, and trade routes were bringing in new dye sources. I know that in early on, I think one of the slides in my thesis slide, actually, the one that had the graph of, you know, different elements of the sweater, there was Russian influences in dyeing techniques as well. Hope that helps. It is tricky, I have to say, to talk to myself, you know? So I felt myself stopping and starting because I'm waiting to get the questions, and that's not possible in this media. So it's a challenge. I'll have to work on that.
Well, I do have some more questions. So more questions about red, actually, thinking about imports of some of those materials. And somebody points out that the imports came early, and that the Swedish influence makes a lot of sense. We had a couple people who are interested in motif in addition to color. Is there anything you could say about the selection of motifs, or perhaps symbolism of any of the motifs?
Well, you see the dancing girls, there's a motif, and the dancing girls tended to be on the crochet areas of the sweater and not the knitting areas. There's sort of a funny thing when you study a lot of these sweaters. I noticed that some of the pine tree type motifs tended to be more in the knitted areas, where the dancing girls had geometric motifs. That, when I think back to textile history, I think of the dancing girls as being a Swedish motif. You see it often in embroidery. And you have these gridded patterns that came from weaving into embroidery, into knitting, into crochet, and they you know, there's a lot of influence going back and forth. And there's stories about people that would collect patterns, where some ladies would take their knitting in with them to church, not to knit on something, but they would sit behind someone that had a really interesting pattern. And while they're at church, they would re-knit that person's pattern so that they would have that captured. They go home and use it for their own sources. So there's a lot of, you know, early design elements that refer to nature and study of different patterns in the natural world. And then you have different gridded patterns that have been around for many different media for many different years. And the beauty of the Korsnäs sweater is it combines a lot of different thoughts, techniques, colors into one sweater that has been identified as a traditional Korsnäs look in that area of Finland.
Somebody
And
also asked about how far the Korsnäs sweater traveled? Was it found further afield in Finland, or was it really a regionally specific?
It was pretty regionally specific to my knowledge, in the Ostrobothian region, which is the western coast, the coastal communities, villages, up and down the coast. I would say if you would said Korsnäs was, you know, ground zero for it, it would go up into the Vasa and then down north of Turku on the coastal areas. But, you know, everything will begin to move out. I know that when I met Marketa Luutinen for the first time in Helsinki, not knowing or not having been to Finland before, I knit my sweater, I wore it, you know, downtown thinking I'd see all these other Korsnäs sweaters, and there certainly wasn't. And someone called Marketa the next day and said, I saw a lady walking in Helsinki with a Korsnäs sweater. So someone saw me walking, didn't know me, called Marketa and said, there's a, you know, Korsnäs sweater walking around. So it wasn't like, well, today you don't see them all over the place, but if you're in Korsnäs, you see them. So it's probably true back then, and it's true today, that it is somewhat isolated in that area.
Interestingly, one of our participants shared with us a link of an image of a bus in Ostrobothnia that has a mascot logo wearing a Korsnäs sweater
Yeah.
as well.
And
So
you'll see them in paintings. There's a lot of different beautiful paintings that it's another thread for textile historians to be able to see how it's influenced in the arts and culture outside of textile culture.
well, super. I know we're coming to the end of our hour, and we answered a lot of the questions, but if people have additional questions or they want to know more information, obviously Gail is very generously shared her contact information here. And so I think with that, I just want to thank everybody again for joining us. Thank you so much, Gail. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. And I'm looking forward to seeing a Korsnäs sweater in person myself someday before too long.
Good. I'm working on a second one. Hopefully it'll be done.
Super.